What is up, Brian from Ballistic Tech here, and yeah, I'm a sim racing YouTube channel now.
What's funny?
No, not really, but for a few years I've been watching and dabbling with a few titles and watching a lot of sim racing YouTubers and streamers like Jimmy Broadbent, Super GT, and of course, Coach Dave, aka David Perro. And now I kind of want to take a bigger step into the world of sim racing and racing games. For some background on me, I'm no sim racing or driving game pro. I'm much closer to a beginner, like I imagine a lot of you guys are watching this video, maybe looking to get your first wheel. I've mainly played with the controller up to now, so this would be my first experience owning and primarily using a pedal set to race. I played a ton of racing games through the years, but kind of fell out of the hobby. Since I'm diving back in, I wanted to share my experience with you guys, starting with the pretty in-depth unboxing and first impressions of this guy, the Logitech G29 driving force racing wheel. In general, a wheel and pedals are the #1 thing you can do for more immersion and to try to get faster in racing games or sims. So that's where I started. You guys know I love tech and gear, and sim racing has plenty of awesome gear to fiend over. It can actually be quite daunting looking at it from the outside in if you're just getting started. The G920/G29 is considered one of the best starter wheels in terms of functionality and price on the market. Logitech is a pretty tried and trusted name. Of course, they make a lot of PC and gaming peripherals, mice, keyboards, headsets, and yeah, that definitely influenced my choice. I'm familiar with the brand. It's not that I don't know or trust the other brands like Thrustmaster and Fanatec, but I just knew Logitech, so it was kind of my first company that I looked at. In terms of wheels and pedals, Logitech has 2 current gen sets, well really one. G920 is their most recent offering for Xbox and PC, while the G29 is the PS4, PS3, and PC compatible version. Basically, they have identical internal designs, just a few differences really. Both wheels were released in 2015, and they're iterations of the venerable Logitech G27, G25, and Driving Force GT wheels of previous generations. Both of these current gen wheel and pedal sets have the same pedals, which are basically updated versions from the G27. They've got the same sensors inside of them, the same motors inside of them, which offer the same force feedback, and they both have the same type of gearing as well. Most of what I say in regards to the G920 will be true for the G29 unless I otherwise specify. If you want to know something specific about the G920 versus the G29, let me know in the comments below. I want to help you make the best buying decision that you can for your starter wheel. In the box for the wheels and pedals, you get a power cable for your region. Then after that, we have the pedal set. It is worth noting that the gas pedal is actually offset. It's on a different plane than the brake and the clutch, which is probably going to be helpful for heel and toe, at least I hope. Again, it's very similar to the G27 in look and construction. The biggest difference is in the brake pedal feel, which I'll talk about a little bit down the road. And then last but not least, we have the single unit wheelbase and wheel rim. You should know that the Logitech wheel rims are not detachable without modification. Some more expensive wheels from Fanatec and Thrustmaster are detachable, so you can swap rim from their ecosystem or and even third-party DIY wheels with a lot more ease. And getting it out of box, I think it looks pretty sharp. It's more sleek and modern looking than the G27 for sure. The backside of the base is kind of designed to look like the front grille of a car. Some people don't like that base design. You really don't see it while you're using it, so it's not a big deal for me. First impressions of the wheel rim, it has a nice sports car kind of look to it. It kind of reminds me of like the Mazda MX-5 Cup car wheel or something like a Porsche Cup car. All right, let's jump into the specs. The release date on these was of course way back in December 2015. So it's a 5-year-old design based mostly on 10 to 14-year-old designs. So that's going to be one of the biggest negatives you'll see online. The force feedback system is dated in the current marketplace. Also, there's not really any kind of first party upgrade path or ecosystem outside of the shifter. And that's especially if you're on console. If you're on PC, you can generally get other brands' pedals, wheelbases, and shifters working via USB, so you kind of mix and match those. There is a way to do something similar on console, but it involves third-party hardware. For price, the MSRP on this one was $399 without the shifter when it first launched. And the shifter was actually a $120 premium. So I was able to pick up the G920 plus the driving force shifter and a copy of Forza 7 for $300 a while back. So I basically got the wheel and pedals for around $200. I'd say $250 is generally the going rate for my research on this. You can find sales for as low as $180. Refurbished and secondhand, you should definitely be looking for below $200. That obviously changes as the product gets older and when supply and demand isn't a big factor, kind of like it is right now during the quarantine. I want to note again that the shifter is sold separately, but sometimes it's bundled by retailers for a discount. Definitely check the links in the description to a few different retailers to see if you can find it for a price that agrees with you. The shifter, as I mentioned, was about $60 at the time of this video. You can find it refurbished or used easily for under $50. For the wheel specs, it has a 280 millimeter rim that's around 11 inches, and it features 900 degrees of rotation. Rotation is measured by a Hall effect steering sensor, which is an upgrade from the digital encoders of previous generations. You're going to get 16 bits or around 65,000 steps of wheel resolution from that sensor, and it's magnetic. So hopefully Logitech's reputation of having wheels that last a long time will be true for this. It features dual brush motors for force feedback. Those motors put out around 2.2 Newton meters of torque. From my research, it does have an overheat safeguard. These utilize helical gearing, which do have anti-backlash built into them. The G25 use straight gearing, so that's one of the kind of iterative improvements they've done with the G29 and G920. Geared wheels are somewhat antiquated in the current marketplace, but still pretty common for lower level, entry level wheels. The G920 has a total of 15 buttons versus the G29's 22 buttons and functions. You got the face or ABXY buttons, you got two shifters, of course, the menu and share button, and the left side and right side button, the Xbox button, and a four-way D-pad. The G29 has an additional 2 extra PS system buttons, which can be reprogrammed on PC. It has a left and right dial, a return button, and a plus and minus button. For the wheel construction, it's a mixture of materials. For the wheelbase, it's got a plastic shell, as you can see, but a lot of the internals used to support and brace the motors are metal, which is good. It has a steel steering shaft. The mounting clamps are actually nylon, but it also has M6 metal threaded mounting holes for a rig, or if you want to drill holes in your desk or whatever you're mounting it to. For the actual wheel rim, you can see we've got a D-shaped 3-spoke anodized aluminum wheel. It's got a nice brushed aluminum look to it where the metal parts show through. It's flat, there's no real dish to it, so that might impact your decision if you're maybe looking to play a lot of drifting or NASCAR games. It has some ergonomic shapes around the rim for your hands to kind of slot into. It's covered in real hand-stitched leather, and I think that's pretty unique for something in its price point. Overall, it feels very comfortable in the hand, and it doesn't shift or stretch around, which I was a little worried about. The brushed stainless steel shifter paddles rotate with the wheel, unlike some other low cost wheels, which are static. And when you're putting a lot of lock in, sometimes you can get to a point where it's kind of hard to reach them. But with this one, they rotate with the wheel. I've been able to reach the paddles really well. I've got bigger hands. The paddle shifter switches feel pretty decent on this, nowhere near as good as some of the magnetic shifters I've used on very expensive rigs that I've gotten a chance to check out at like trade shows like PAX and CES. I can generally always tell when they actuate, and I'd say they're appropriate for the price point. Pretty much all the other buttons are plastic. The face buttons and D-pads feel pretty close to what you'd find on an Xbox controller, so good job there, Logitech. A lot of people get, especially the D-pad, very, very wrong, but you're able to hit the up, down, left, right, and the up and left, and it shows up on the PC really, really well, and you don't get any double hits. The grayish white buttons kind of on the wheel rim, the left side, right side menu, and share button, they don't feel as good as I'd like. They kind of shift around under your fingers and just don't feel as good. You can tell when you've clicked them, but they're probably the least premium feeling part of the actual wheelbase in my opinion. The Xbox button feels okay. You can definitely tell when you clicked it. There is an LED above the Xbox button, which some people might find annoying if you leave the wheel plugged in all the time in say your bedroom or dorm room or something like that. All right, moving on to the pedal specs. You get 3 pedals, the gas, brake, and clutch, which is actually not a given at this price point. Some only feature 2 from the competitors in the, you know, like the $100 to $200 price range. All of the pedals utilize 10K potentiometers. There's no Hall effect or load cell sensors at this price point, and I think that's to be expected. So with potentiometers in all 3 pedals, you're gonna get about 8 bits or 256 steps of pedal resolution. The brake pedal is the most noteworthy. It's supposed to be self-calibrating and non-linear according to Logitech's feature list. It has a rubber stopper in the brake pedal travel, which is supposed to replicate the increased pressure required to increase braking in a real car. I've read a lot of people prefer to take this out, but you should note that the pedal doesn't have a linear mapping when plugged into the wheelbase. But people have noted if you do remove the stopper, the longer portions of the pedal stroke don't feel linear and it feels really off. But that's because they're not supposed to. That's the way Logitech designed it. You can get replacement rubber stoppers to put in there. And you can also get a third-party adapter, which will take these and make them a standalone USB pedal set. I'm pretty sure that you can take those and customize it so that it does have a linear mapping, but that's kind of a long way to go with a lower level, entry level pedal set. The pedals do have a carpet grip system, so when you put it down on the carpet, it hopefully won't slide as much. It does also feature 6 M6 hard metal mounting points, so if you have a rig, you can mount it that way. For the pedal construction and feel, it's got a plastic shell around it, but it does have steel pedal frames and arms. Overall, the design, as I mentioned, hasn't changed much from the G25 and G27 for the overall construction. You've got those brushed stainless steel pedal faces, which I think look pretty good. Logitech noted in their documentation that the plastic piston sleeves are made out of an acetyl material. I'm not sure if on previous generations that was a different material and they broke, but hopefully they should be robust and stand up to a lot of use. The resistance differs between the 3 pedals quite a bit. Clutch doesn't have any real clutch feel, for the lack of a better term. There's no like changing resistance as you push it in. There's no feel for a bright point or anything, and I honestly wouldn't expect that at that price point. I just wanted to mention that. The gas is just linear, again with no variable resistance. And for the brake, when I first tried it, I could really feel that rubber stopper in there. About 50% into the travel, you start to really feel it, and it becomes harder to depress the brake. I don't know if I'm gonna like it or not. I feel a little bit biased, honestly, because I've already read so many people that mention that they don't like it. So I might remove the stopper, but I won't replace it or change anything like the springs or anything like that before I do the full review. For the shifter, I'm gonna again say that this is sold separately unless you get it in a bundle, and it's only compatible with the G920 and G29. But like the pedals, you can use it in a standalone if you buy a third-party adapter. It features 6 speeds with a push-down reverse for the 7th gear. It's got 3 clamping mounts and 2 M6 metal mounting threads for rigs, which is really nice. But I will say, I think the shifter is probably the least premium feeling component out of the current Logitech lineup. It does have some type of like centering spring system and notch gating to give it the overall feel of a real H-pattern shifter. It's of course not attached to any like real transmission or clutch whatsoever, so it's going to be very game dependent as to whether or not clutching and shifting incorrectly will cause a misshift, and just how precise your timing needs to be will also be dependent on the game. I'm hoping to get started though. It will, definitely do the trick. I'm thinking that. We'll see. In terms of setup, it was very easy. You're going to want to plug the pedals, and if you have the shifter, plug that into the base. They're very clearly marked on the underside of the wheelbase, and I think they're keyed, so you can't put them in wrong, upside down. The male and female sides are actually reversed, which is actually a really clever design. There is built-in cable management with a cable wrap and channels for the accessories and power cables to pass out without pinching the cables, which seems very nice. You're gonna have this clamped down to a desk, so you don't want to pinch the cables. After you've got the accessories plugged in, you want to plug in the power cable and then plug that into the wall. Next, you tighten down the wheelbase to your surface or your rig. Use the screws if you can. You definitely want to mount it to the most solid surface you can in order to get the most out of your force feedback. Then you want to place the pedals under your wheel, get them into a comfortable position. Turn down the carpet grippers. If you're on carpet, they should serve a little bit in order to help them not move around. And if you're not on carpet, definitely check out a lot of the methods people have posted on Reddit. There's tons of people who, you know, kind of rig up something so that the pedals won't move around, and also on YouTube. Then if you have the shifter, place it on the side of the wheel that you want and tighten it down. Of course, that'll depend on what country you're in and if you're driving a left-hand drive or right-hand drive car. One thing to note, a difference between the G29 in the G920 is that the G29 has a PS3, PS4 switch. So make sure that's in the right position. If you're on PS4, of course, it should be in PS4. And if you're on PC, you want that to also be in the PS4 position. Once you do get it plugged in, the wheel should spin around and self-calibrate every single time. So if you plug it in, definitely keep your hands away. And if you keep it plugged in, every time you turn on your console system, it's gonna spin up and turn around. So definitely not good to have going on if you have little ones around. So I recommend unplugging it from your system when it's not in use. The wheel was recognized on all the PCs. I tried it running various patches of both Windows 8 and Windows 10, so no problems there. On PC, I could calibrate it right away with kind of the auto installed drivers, or I could install Logitech's peripheral software. I tried both of them. The Logitech gaming software and G Hub work with the wheel, and with that you're going to be able to update the firmware really easily. You can change things like the centering force and calibrate the degrees of rotation, and you can change each individual pedal stroke. You can of course assign different functions to all the buttons and save them to game specific profiles, which can then auto load on game start or be changed manually. One cool thing is that you can actually set multiple different profiles for a specific game and perhaps different cars. So say you're driving an LMP car, you can set one of the buttons to the boost button, but use it for something completely different in another car. Like if you're in the skip barber, you can use the visor tear off or something like that. It was also recognized immediately on Xbox One, so that's of course gonna be plug and play on consoles. So for some first impressions on gaming, first I tried it on Xbox. I only really tried Forza Motorsport 7, and mostly on PC these days. It's worth noting that all the new Forza games are play anywhere. So if you choose to get the G920, you could move the steering wheel between PC setup and your console setup. I've also read that the next generation Series X is supposed to have full backwards compatibility for all peripherals. So the G920 should technically work on that so that you won't have to buy a new wheel. We'll see if Logitech has a new offering for the next gen consoles and if it's ready to go at launch, or if it takes a couple years like this gen did. So Forza titles aren't known to have the best wheel support. After launch, I think Forza 7 actually got much better wheel support and much more in terms of force feedback settings and things like that. Same thing for Horizon 3 and 4, if I'm not mistaken. But mostly those games are kind of designed to be played with the controller first and foremost. And so the majority of the fastest guys in that game are going to be using a gamepad. But if immersion is your goal, I definitely think the G920 will enhance your experience well above a controller. I was actually surprised about the number of force feedback settings you could customize on console. Typically on console, they have like kind of presets and you can maybe change like the torque, but there was actually quite a few of them in there. In general, force feedback is extremely subjective. It's hard for me, especially as a newcomer, to describe everything, but using it, I could definitely feel things like when I rolled over a curb, all of the bumps from the other cars, which happens a lot in Forza, and definitely when I went off the track. I could feel stuff like the steering going light if I understeered or if I went into a slide, and I was able to make corrections, which is pretty cool. Shifter worked well in Forza on Xbox and PC. It was nice to have the option to use it for cars that featured manual gearbox, especially a lot of the older production and street cars, which are featured in the game. All right, now onto PC. It was recognized out of the box by every game I tried. All of the buttons worked, and they had pre-configured and editable button mappings in every single game. For Forza 7, pretty similar experience to the Xbox, but with much better graphics. Next game I tried was iRacing, and it was a lot of fun. I'm brand new to that title outside of playing it in some demos at conferences and things like that. It had a really steep learning curve, even with just the MX-5, which is the only car I have unlocked for online play right now. Calibration works really easily. They step you through it, and you just basically hit every button that you want to map to certain things. I drove the MX-5 with both as a sequential and as a manual. I tried all the different gearing assists. Full manual was definitely the funnest. I had a lot of fun with that. I was definitely slower, but getting to drive around a track in the anger, so to speak, just kind of slapping through the gears and doing my best to try to heel toe, without missing shifts, but I did miss a lot of shifts. It was a lot of fun. Most modern race cars have sequential gearboxes with paddle shifter these days, so they do things like auto blip for you on downshifts and will always be faster than a manual. In pretty much all games, you can use the paddle shifters or a gearbox for all cars, no matter if they have a paddle shifter or an H pattern in the car. But if you're really looking to, play some games in cars with H patterns, I'd say $60 is a pretty nice price point to get into it, especially if you're just dipping your toes. The force feedback worked pretty well. Again, I was able to, catch oversteers and stuff like that, but it didn't have as many settings to configure compared to Forza, which I was kind of surprised considering it's much more of a hardcore simulator. The next game I tried was Assetto Corsa Competizione. I got to try out some GT3 cars that go way faster than the MX-5. Again, it was a lot harder to control the cars than a lot of the arcade-ish games I've played. The driving and force feedback definitely felt a lot different than iRacing. I don't really have the vocabulary to describe it quite yet, but in my full review, I'll try to break it down in a more articulated way. It was really cool driving as David Perel and getting to race in his Rinaldi Racing 333 Ferrari with the yellow gloves. I really love that car, the 488 GT3. I drove it around Brands Hatch and Spa. Tried to get through Raidillon and Eau Rouge without lifting, and of course the first time I died, and the second and third time I barely kept it on the track, but hopefully that will come with time. The game worked really well with the wheels. You can customize inputs and you can fine-tune force feedback. The next game I tried was F1 2019, a little bit more of a simcade-ish type game. I didn't play it as much, but it worked well out of the box, right away with the wheel. I felt really cool trying some high downforce cars, moving from the MX-5 and then the Ferrari GT3 car. And I got to drive F1 cars around all the tracks I've seen on TV. So that's a really big plus to having a wheel. It's a little bit less of a hardcore sim than the other PC titles. So if you're not really into the sims, that's definitely a good title that you can pick up. It's about as approachable as something like GT Sport or Forza, but there is a good amount of depth there if you want to get into kind of like the competitive esports side of it as well. But yeah, the driving, I don't know, it felt a little floatier after coming from the other titles like iRacing and ACC. I don't think that's the fault of the wheel at all. I think it's the physics in the game. I'm not sure I had the rotation set correctly, so I definitely need to get that sorted out. I started doing more playing with the buttons in that game than any other of the games, flipping through the menus so you can change stuff like fuel mix and ERS. I'm still not really used to it. In most cases, it was pretty hard for me just to keep the high downforce super fast F1 car on the track, but it was still really cool to be able to play that game with the wheel.
Keep going for now, keep going.
I can't, it's broken! It's broken! Anti-stall! It's off.
The last title I tried was Project Cars 2. I spent the least amount of time on that one. Again, the physics and force feedback were different in this game compared to all the other ones. So you really have to, either kind of decide you're just going to play one game or just get used to being able to have different driving approaches depending on what game you're playing. Didn't really have much else noteworthy for Project Cars 2. I'll try to play it a little bit more before the final review. To touch a little bit more on force feedback, I was kind of surprised on how different it felt from title to title. It was really dependent on how it was coded in the game and how well the game coder interfaced with the SDK or API for the wheel. So it's very subjective. Again, I will say it didn't feel too powerful at all. I didn't expect it to. This is one of the lower torque wheels on the market. It feels great the first time you're able to catch an oversteer and like kind of cross your arms over and just keep driving up the road. That sense of immersion, I don't think you can get anything like it with a controller. You're going to be using a lot less assist like counter steer to help you. I will say I did notice the notchiness that a lot of people talk about with the Logitech wheels, in particular at lower speeds with slower movements. You can kind of feel like each step of the motor, or maybe it's like the gear teeth interfacing or something like that. I'm not sure. It wasn't too immersion killing for me. I think maybe because I'm a beginner and I'm just able to, really focus on the racing and not necessarily the notchiness of the wheel. It didn't interrupt being able to feel the force feedback at all. Another thing I noticed a lot of people talk about is the centering speed. It didn't seem particularly fast when I tried a little bit of drifting. So, that's maybe something to think about if you are a drifter, but there's a huge number of drifting guides on for the G920 and G29. So it definitely shouldn't be a problem. Just look up G920 drifting on YouTube, and there'll be plenty of guides for that. I didn't notice any lag or unresponsiveness. Compared to a gamepad, it felt very, very snappy, and I was able to react a lot faster. And again, there's less steering assist, so they're smoothing out your inputs a lot less, so you have to be more precise, but it opens up more opportunity to really control the car versus the controller. So now for the button layout. The buttons are pretty much laid out on what's essentially kind of like a button box bolted to the back of the rim, the few being on the rim itself, and that's actually similar to a lot of higher end wheels, and even real race car wheels. Not every button is reachable while maintaining, you know, that typical 9-3 hand position, but I don't think it's too much of a problem. You obviously want to set functions that you use the most to something that's easily reachable. Things like look left, look right, mirror, toggling UI, and changing important car parameters like traction control, ABS, and brake bias, and things like that that you want to change on the fly while driving. Put those there. Then identify stuff that you don't have to use as much, you know, while you're having full lock and you're shifting, and put those on the other buttons that are harder to reach, and just use those when you're in straights and things like that. The number of buttons on the G920 is somewhat of a concern for me after playing a few games in iRacing. In particular, I pretty quickly ran out of the inputs that I wanted to have mapped based on watching a lot of YouTubers and streamers and seeing what they have. Again, brake bias, pit limiter, push to talk, relatives, and different UI things that you want to toggle all the time. We'll see if that becomes more of an issue down the road, but you know, the G29 is looking a little bit more attractive based purely on the number of buttons at this point. An option outside of modding or changing the wheelbase includes getting something like a side mounted button box, similar to what a lot of real cars have in those real race cars. You plug this in as an independent USB HID device, and you map a bunch of the game's keys to it, and you can put stuff like ignition and other things you won't be doing actively all the time while driving. Put that on the button box. A lot of people also utilize an Elgato Stream Deck as a button box. That's a great option if you already have one. A super low-tech option is just to take something like an inexpensive keypad that you can get that's like a USB device and just use it as a button box. Yeah, so definitely check out the G29 if you're looking to play on PC. Of course, if you're playing on PS4. If you're on Xbox, you don't really have many other options in order to increase the number of buttons. I've seen some people putting a stick on their controller and using some of the controller inputs as an e-brake. So, you know, there's stuff like that, but on Xbox, you don't have a lot of options for increasing your inputs. Right now to the big thing, the brake. It was pretty weird, to be honest. It felt better in some games than in other games. Depending on the game or sim, I noticed you may not be able to or want to be able to achieve full 100% pressure, which will lock up the brakes. On a few of the games, I had to adjust the upper limit of the brake just so that I could get up to like 90% braking without feeling like I was absolutely standing up on the brake pedal. On other games, that wasn't really a problem. For those of you who might be looking to make a buying decision more immediately and want to consider some of the options, you've got like the Thrustmaster, T150, and TMX area wheels. There's not really anything from Fanatec in this price range. Below that, you've got some stuff from like Hori or Ori, and those are in the $100 range. I'd try to save up and, you know, find something like this for around $200, and those are going to be your best option in terms of not immediately wanting to upgrade, in my opinion. If you maybe have a little bit more to spend, Logitech obviously doesn't have anything else, but in the $500 price range, you can look at something like the Thrustmaster 300 RS GT, I think it's called. And in Fanatec, you've got like the CSL Elite, but anything above that from Fanatec, just the wheelbase is going to cost like $500. But the cool thing with Fanatec is that you can buy pedals separate from the wheelbase, separate from the wheel rims, so you can mix and match a lot more with those ecosystems that they're providing. So even if you start out with this Logitech bundle, you can maybe get Fanatec or Thrustmaster pedals. Both Fanatec and Thrustmaster do have load cell pedals out standalone that are, I think, between $200 and $300, and that could be a great investment if you're really starting to get more competitive. A lot of people say that pedals are the most important thing to upgrade after maybe like getting a rig and a better computer, because brake feel is one of the things that allows you to get the most time off your laps, essentially. If you're into modding and customizing your gear, there's quite a few mods out for these wheels and most wheels on the market, and I'm probably going to be trying those. There's a lot of 3D printable stuff. There's some ready-made products as well. As I mentioned, there's also a couple of adapters that let you use either G920 or G29 cross-platform. You can mix and match a bunch of stuff like I mentioned. So if there's anything you want me to specifically test or try with this wheel, especially before my review, let me know. Overall, I'm really excited to have this wheel. It adds so much immersion for playing driving games and getting started in sim racing especially. I feel like I'm always going to want to drive with this wheel over a gamepad. Now, you know, maybe if I'm just sitting on the couch and I want to play some Gran Turismo, I will. But even for like Forza, which is, you know, maybe not the fastest way to play with the wheel, I'm probably going to use the wheel. If you're currently using a controller and want more immersion, definitely look into getting a wheel. If you want to dip your toes into sim racing and maybe competitive, you're definitely going to want to have a wheel. And if you're just kind of like a motorsports fan that wants to, you know, try your hands at the helm of some of your favorite cars that you see on TV without breaking the bank, I definitely recommend putting the G920 or G29 on your short list. That is it for this video. Finally, as I mentioned, I like to do in-depth videos, so my review will cover kind of long-term use and, you know, a final decision of whether or not I recommend this. Thank you guys for tuning in. Thank you for, you know, watching my first video back. Sim racing is a new kind of area I want to get into. I'll still be doing PC gaming and PC build and console stuff down the road, but I'm happy to share kind of my experiences with you guys. Thank you so much. Check out the description for links to social media and all that good stuff. I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.